Okay, let's go to the GDI system and show you some of the components that we talked about likely on a Ford. If you take a look at the high pressure pump here, remember it's real essential here. This is the heartbeat of the system. It's a mechanically driven, electronically controlled pump. Okay, remember the high pressure pump is the heart of the system. So what we talked about on the Fords, we have to separate the low side, which is a spring lock connector coming in here, and a high side. Now, to warn you guys about something, General Motors says if you break this high side line, obviously after you depressurize the system, you do not reuse it because obviously the safety concerns. Okay, continuing on here, General Motors will support you with a Schrader valve. Obviously, when we do the injector cleaning, obviously going to be very critical. Now, remember, this is on the low side of the system, so we're typically looking at about 50 to 60 psi. We want to get in that in detail a bit later on because we're actually going to be reading the low side with the scan tool, and obviously the Schrader valve is going to be optional for you to use your mechanical pressure gauge, or here again more essentially by cleaning injectors. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to another component. Okay, what you're looking at here is the PCM, and obviously you can see three separate connectors. Now, like we talked about earlier on the Ford systems, your NOR lights will not work in any event that you think you have no injector pulse, for creating a no start. So I think you would agree with me here to actually cut all this tape away and trying to gain access to back probing or wire piercing to get the injector drive signals. We're not going to do that. We're going to leave this guy alone. And what we're going to do here shortly is going to move right down to the injector harness connector, and we'll back probe there to get the injector signals. Now, the reason why we have to do that, we talked about this on the Fords, the injectors are buried. You will not find them, feel them, or see them. So we're going to gain access to the harness connector at the injectors to do our signal tracing with the lab scope on a voltage trace and a current trace. Okay, let's point out something on these new systems that I literally like. Map sensor being our electronic vacuum gauge, so to speak. Now, this 2.4 liter Ecotec motor in this 2011 Equinox is a mass airflow equipped engine. Now, you can see by the ornament cover, we removed the ornament cover, the ductwork, we've disconnected mass airflow. So we actually made the computer default using map sensor values to calculate engine load, injector on time, spark time, etc. So when you remove all this stuff to do your intake cleaning, obviously you cannot run this vehicle with the ductwork off unless you unplug the mass airflow sensor, which is what we've essentially done. So because we have the map sensor or electronic vacuum gauge, we'll talk about those readings on the scan tool because that's one of those sensors we're going to use to verify if we have good mechanical integrity of these engines. Okay, as we said before, accessibility to the injectors does not exist, so we're going to make it easy. If you go down here and you take a look at this connector right here, this is the harness connector to the injectors. Now, via the schematic, we'll just go and find a 2 wires to the injector. Now, remember, with the dual trace lab scope, we literally have to use both channels of lab scope, go across both wires of the injector, whatever the specific says on the schematic, and we'll look at the voltage trace. But again, that's going to be the easy access point to signal trace the injector drive circuits. Okay, if you look down here at my low side line, obviously the supply side, on the earlier GM systems, you'll see a round skull can-like device, which was the pulsator. Now, because this is a 2011, it doesn't have it, but what we want to tell you on earlier systems, when you look at the low side pressure, it's the responsibility of that skull can or the pulsator to absorb those pressure surges. I just want to warn you, when you're looking at the low side pressure, via the scan tool or the mechanical field pressure gauge, it's perfectly normal for you to see a 50 to 60 psi pulse, which is the pulsator absorbing the pressure surges from the high pressure pump back into the low side of the system. Now, if you look down here on this late model, 2011, the skull can is gone, the pulsator doesn't exist. So what they've done, they've redesigned the fuel pump somehow with a check valve to absorb those pressure surges. So what we're going to do on this late model one, we're going to start it up, we're going to look at that low side pressure with the mechanical field pressure gauge, and you'll see this fuel pressure is going to be rock stable on the low side. Okay, let's talk about rest pressure. On any of the electronic or mechanical returner systems found on the GDI systems, they will all hold rest pressure. If you're looking here on the low side, you can see after a brief hot soak here, this gauge is maintained about 58 psi. Now, typically the spec says no more than a 5 psi pressure drop after a key off during a hot soak in 60-second period. So you can see, obviously, it's one of the critical points. Now, if you had, something leaking on the low side, like let's just say the check valve in the fuel pump, whatever the case may be, obviously you're going to bleed off here and you might have that hot soak extended cranking type condition. So again, we can look at this low side via the scan tool, or the way we're doing it right here with the mechanical fuel pressure gauge, or in addition, when we go to the scan tool hands-on, we'll look at the low side with the scan tool and the high side with the scan tool, as you will see.